I've been working on making a drawing for a table that we're building, but I wanted to take a break from that a minute and tell you a story. See if this works and see if there's any interest in it. Years ago, when we lived in the North Georgia mountains, while I was in seminary, one of the churches we served was the Pleasant Hill United Methodist Church, and the parsonage was right there next to it. It had a shared driveway. Now, this valley that we lived in was in the Chattahoochee Forest. There was a mountain range to one side of us, a mountain range to the other. And we lived so far out, some said you had to go toward town to hunt. It was that far out in the country. And even to go to the closest grocery store, we had to cross into the next county line, which is about 10 or 12 miles away. But we lived there, and it was a beautiful place. And my office or my study was situated in such that I could watch the sun come up over the mountain range to the east. It was just a beautiful place. But there was a little problem in that valley. Brian and Anita had built the first, built a nice house, built the nicest house there in the valley. And they were one of the first ones to build since we were there. But they had lived in that house just about a mile down the road from the parsonage. They had lived in that house but just a few days till that somebody backed the truck up to the back door and loaded out all of their electronics, TVs, VCR back in that day, DVDs, whatever it was, and just spent some time loading their truck. And when they came home from work, they found their house had been robbed. Well, they put in an alarm system and trying to get that all working right. There were some problems with it. Sometimes it would just be activated by something unknown, and a siren and everything would be blaring up and down through the valley. The valley was such that this created like a speaker, and so the sound was amplified more than it would be in the flatlands of the, say, the Mississippi Delta. But Brian and Anita had this alarm, and they were trying to get it all worked out. And Anita was the choir director at our church, and she was also a public school teacher. And she had to go to a conference and going to be away from the house for the weekend, and she and Brian were going to take that trip together. And so she called and said that she wasn't going to be at church on Sunday and had the music all worked out. And she wanted me to be aware that in case her alarm went off, she wanted me to go and reset it. And that would be fine. So they were gone over the weekend, and Saturday night, about 11:30, or maybe it might have been as late as 11:45, the phone rang at the parsonage, and it was Miss Wilma. Miss Wilma told me, she said, "Now, preacher, if you want everybody to be at church Sunday, you better turn off Brian and Anita's alarm. It's going off and keeping us all awake down here on this end of the valley." I don't usually go to bed very early on Saturday night, and even then I hadn't gone to bed, but I had begun to get ready. I had on my t-shirt, and I got the phone call, so I jumped in my blue jeans and put on my what they call roach-killing cowboy boots in the day, and I grabbed my truck keys, and I had a 1992 Ford F-250. I had a lot of painting down the side, had bucket seats, and had the cab lights across the top of the cab, and it had lights down the running board. One church member described it as a Christmas tree going down the road. I love that diesel truck, and you could hear that diesel rattle. And Christy, my wife, didn't like riding in that truck too much. And if she ever saw a church member when we were approaching, she would kind of scrooge down in the seat not to be seen. That's a little bit of an exaggeration, but this is the pickup I was driving. And so while I was getting ready to leave, Lamar, Brian and Anita's neighbor, said, "Come get him," and he'd go with me. So I pulled into Lamar's driveway to pick him up, and he's standing there in the driveway, at 11:45 at night with a t-shirt on like me, but he had on cut-off blue jeans, and he had on his roach-killing cowboy boots, and he had a shotgun. It looked like a little 3-year-old that wanted to play army. It took me a little convincing for him to leave the shotgun there, so we propped it up against a tree. I told him I didn't want any robbers to get the gun away from us, to possibly shoot us. So we left the shotgun there, and on the way to Brian and Anita's house, I turned on every light I could, and to make it as bright as I could, I wanted to scare off any potential robbers that might be there. And so we went into the gravel driveway around the back of the house. I turned the headlights on high beam. I revved that diesel engine up as loud as I could get it, and we parked it there right at the back, in the back driveway, and we started looking. Well, there was no evidence immediately of any breaking and entering. The door was fine. It had not been jimmied. No windows were broken that we could see. So we began to peer in the back window and looking to see if somebody might be hiding in there in the shadows of the corners of the room. Well, we couldn't find anybody. But about that time, the gravel in the driveway was disturbed, and coming around the corner of the house was a sheriff's deputy. Great that he had come to check on Brian and Anita's house because their alarm had signaled them, and it wasn't so great, really. It was really kind of awkward. It was one of those moments you wish hadn't happened. But he got out, and he was a big old drink of water, and he talked in a very slow southern drawl. And he said, "You boys, take it easy. No sudden moves. Keep your hands where I can see them." I never had a gun pulled on me as a Methodist pastor. That was something that no seminary course could prepare you for. So we took it easy. We didn't make very many moves. We're standing there on Brian and Anita's carport with our hands up in the air. And the deputy asked something that I wasn't expecting. He said, "You boys got any ID?" And we both patted our back pockets where we kept our wallets, but we didn't have any wallets. We had left in such a hurry that we didn't pick up the wallets. And Lamar had that deer in the headlight look at me, and I probably did at him. And I was reading the headlines in the Sunday morning paper. Local pastor, a resident chaplain at the Crossbar Motel, or the other one might have been something like local pastor called Peeping Tom in his music director's house. Well, neither one of those would play too well in that congregation, so we're in a pickle. I said, "Sir," and we're holding our hands up there looking at that barrel of that 357, and I said, "I'm the pastor of Pleasant Hill United Methodist Church right up the road. My cards are in the cup holder of my truck." Well, he ran the tags on that truck to make sure it wasn't stolen. He didn't believe me. And about that time, the gravel in the driveway was disturbed again, and coming around the corner was a little minivan, and in it was, the driver was named Leslie, and her husband Mark was sitting in the passenger side, and he got out. Now Mark is or was a church clown then. Every church has a church clown. I don't know who yours might be, but Mark was the church clown then, and I'd been there about 6 or 8 months, and he had never called me by my name. Mark could make up names. Mark would call me Jim or John and Jerry, and he would always make up a name every time I saw him for all of those 6 months. And I even began to wonder if he really knew who I was. So I told him, Mark, no funny business tonight. This man means business. And truthfully, I was never so glad to hear my official title when he got out. He said, Reverend Pruitt, I'm glad to see you tonight. I said, Mark, I'm really glad to see you. The policeman, the deputy, put his gun away. I hadn't seen a deputy there in 6 months, and he got there in a hurry, and his question was quite probing. He said, you boys got any ID? Let me tell you what I think he was thinking. He was looking at me and Lamar peeping in those back windows, and at about midnight, there shouldn't have been anybody peeping in the windows. About midnight, there shouldn't have been a Methodist pastor, at least that's what he thought, looking in the back windows. And truthfully, I don't believe he thought a Methodist preacher ought to drive what's called a cowboy pickup truck. I guess I was stereotyped, and that's okay. But the question still remains that he asked, you boys got any ID? Now, from the outward sign of all of those experiences, you couldn't have proved that I was a Methodist preacher, even a Christian, kind of doing the things I was doing without all the information known. And so if we ask that question of ourselves today, do we reflect the behavior, the attitude, the lifestyle, that somebody could see us not by the way we dress, not by where we are, but by the way we show the love of Jesus Christ? Would somebody see and know that we have identified ourselves with Jesus? That's the ID I need. I pray God's grace give me that, and you too.